welcome to a new episode of the Up-Beet Dietitians podcast. We've got a brand new guest today. We've got Samina Qureshi with us on the pod. Samina is the founder and registered dietitian at Wholesome Start LLC, which is a weight-inclusive GI nutrition practice based in Houston, Texas.
She specializes in helping people who struggle with irritable bowel syndrome, also known as IBS. She helps them find relief and nourish their bodies without rigid diets, stress, guilt, or shame. Samina respects body diversity and encourages her clients to care for their health in a gentle way that best honors their lifestyle, unique needs, and cultural traditions. Through nutrition coaching, her clients are able to heal their relationship with food, find relief with their uncomfortable gut symptoms, and support long-term gut health. We are so excited to share this episode with you guys. Enjoy.
Hello, Samina. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
We are so excited to have you here. This is our first time getting into this topic, so our listeners are going to love this. We know that IBS is very common, so I think it'll be a episode that has a far reach, hopefully. But before we get into the juicy IBS stuff, walk us through a day of the life, what you do for work, hobbies, all that fun stuff.
Yeah, so I am a local Texan. I've lived and worked here for quite a while. I think something that Emily and I have in common is that I lived in Chicago for a little while. So came back though. So here in Texas, I work 100% virtually in my private practice called Wholesome Start, where I help people learn how to find relief from IBS without rigid diet, stress, guilt, or shame. I am married, have a daughter and a dog, and once this weather cools down, I'm just really excited to go on walks and be outside again.
How hot is it there? Because Hannah and I have typically have pretty similar weather. But you're in Texas.
Yeah. I actually lived in Indiana for a summer. So yes, the summers are really hot there too. In Texas and Houston specifically, it's been in the hundreds to 109 for the past 3 or 4 months, which is unusual. Yeah. This week, it finally came down to 99. And in the mornings, it's in the 80s. And I'm like, oh my gosh, winter.
Okay, what are winters like though? What's the coldest it ever gets where you live?
It gets freezing. So 30s. Okay. Yeah, that's but not until January, February. It stays relatively good weather from good weather meaning 70s and lower, probably starting November.
That's so wild.
As a Midwesterner, my mind is blown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh
so
my
Texas
gosh.
is warm.
Well, I hope it does cool down soon for you because it is nice to go outside and not sweat profusely and
melt.
Oh yeah, for sure. So that's been a really big bummer for me this year is just not having as much outdoor time, especially with a little one.
Yeah. It's very much precious time, especially when they're young and they want to run around, but you don't want them to melt away. to keep them hydrated and cool.
For sure. I'm excited to chat a little bit more, or how I like to say is shit talk a little bit. Because IBS is all about our bowel movements and our bowel habits. So for anyone here, I am not shy about talking about it, right? All of the symptoms. So
let's jump right into it then. Let's start it right off. So they know we're talking about IBS today, but what exactly is IBS? I feel like there's kind of all these different interpretations of what it is, but what would you define it as?
IBS stands for Irritable Bowel Syndrome. It affects about 10 to 15% of adults in the United States. It's known as a functional GI disorder or a disorder of gut-brain interaction. The predominant characteristics are abdominal pain, along with a range of symptoms that affect your bowel habits and frequency. right? So you can have IBS with constipation, you can have IBS with diarrhea, or you could get super lucky and you can get diarrhea and constipation, and that's called IBS mixed. So, yeah, IBS is really fun. It really impacts your quality of life as well, because a lot of my clients struggle with not wanting to leave their home, being uncomfortable ordering at restaurants, not knowing what to eat. And yeah, it can be really, really rough.
Yeah. And as we'll get in today, to kind of, I guess, give a little bit of a spoiler, diet culture too can play a big role in this as well. So, like, not only is it already confusing enough because it's seemingly sometimes like a very random thing where you're not even sure like how foods are going to affect you. And patients always tell me like one day they can have eggs, the next day they can't. It just totally depends. But we also have that diet culture component too, where that can make it worse, which I guess is a perfect segue. Like, you mentioned, weight inclusivity and food freedom and all of that. How do you see with your clients that diet culture does make IBS worse? How does it trigger those
Oh
symptoms?
my goodness. In so many ways. I mean, you
Mhm.
just look at TikTok or any social media, and what do you see? It's all about restriction, eliminating things, eliminating gluten, never touching dairy. And really, IBS is a multifactorial condition, meaning that it is impacted by multiple lifestyle factors, including what you eat. And so diet culture can play a role in possibly you skipping meals and that making your symptoms worse, because what happens when we skip meals, right? The only logical thing for our bodies to do when we skip meals or go long periods of time without eating is to then, when you have an opportunity to eat in large quantities very quickly. And simply eating in large quantities in a short period of time very quickly without chewing enough can lead to these symptoms that you are already struggling with. So, absolutely, ditching diet culture, finding food freedom, working towards healing your relationship with food in itself can can help so much with finding relief from your GI symptoms. And that's my first line approach with my clients, is making sure that they're not getting confused with what diet culture and wellness influencers are putting out there around what supports good gut health, and coming back to the basics of having enough food regularly throughout the day and eating a variety of things that they enjoy.
Hannah and I talk about wellness culture all the time, but I feel like just the world of gut health is
Oof.
crazy, especially online. The things I've seen on there are, I feel like you can find any argument and it'll
Oh yeah.
somehow cure your gut.
Oh, absolutely. And like now all of these influencers like promoting different supplements, like
I was
whether
going to
it's
ask you
green
that.
powders or
Mm.
like just list of like magic cure all gut health supplements or tonics. And my clients come in with lists of supplements,
Mm.
right? Thinking, I mean, yeah, that this is really going to help them, but in fact, it may be contributing to their symptoms, especially if these products like the greens powders, or even if you're having like a fiber one bar, right? These things are fortified with some fibers that may not be tolerated for those who have IBS.
I'm really glad you brought up the greens powders because I feel like that is one of the biggest ones that will like surefire be there. If they're talking about gut health, they're taking their greens every morning.
Oh yeah.
Why? What about the greens powders for our audience? Like, what about that potentially? You talked about like kind of the fiber component, but how can that potentially cause more harm with someone with IBS?
Absolutely. So, like I said earlier, for those with IBS who may also struggle with their relationship with food, oftentimes I see people, because of diet culture and just their, history with possibly disordered eating or eating disorders. For them, the goal is to eat as little as possible. And what these greens powders do is offer yourself an ability to meet certain needs, whether it be micronutrient or fiber needs, without having to consume foods. But the thing about the supplement industry is that they're not very tightly regulated. They're not doing third-party testing unless the company itself is paying for it to be tested for efficacy and quality, and actually have the ingredients in the product that they claim it does. So I'm very weary to recommend supplements, whether it be a greens powder or anything like that, because we just don't know how it's going to impact your GI system. Another thing is that many of these greens powders, the fiber enriched or fortified sodas, and these fiber one bars have inulin or chicory root as their source of fiber, right? And these are high FODMAP gas producing fiber sources, which are very healthy, right? For people who don't have IBS and aren't sensitive to FODMAPs, go for it, enjoy it. If you like it, you like it, no big deal. But for people with IBS, if you are trying to, of course, increase your fiber needs, but don't know what types of fiber may be most beneficial for you, it can really set you back or send you into an IBS flare that is miserable.
I'm glad you brought up the sodas, because those are also, as we all know, very popular right now. And wellness culture, and even us dietitians will say, like, fiber is really great. Like, a lot of us don't get enough fiber. We need more of it. And that can be a fine way to get it in my opinion. But like you said, it's all about the type of fiber with IBS and the sources and quantities and all of that. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I don't think that more fiber is always going to be better, especially if you have IBS that you're dealing with.
Yeah, it's so important to know what type of fiber is going to suit your symptoms. With IBS and dietary management, you're really trying to figure out how your symptoms present and then how to manage those specific symptoms, right? So if we're talking about fiber, if you struggle with IBS diarrhea predominantly, you're going to want to focus more on like the soluble fiber to help bring that poop together and have it pass easily. And then if you're constipated, you want a combination. Of course, you always want a combination of soluble and insoluble fiber, but the insoluble fiber will help to bulk that stool up and kind of stimulate the colon and help you go. So yeah, and then on top of that, with fiber, we talk about FODMAPs, right? Which are fermentable carbohydrates that draw in liquid into the GI system, and then that causes some distension and abdominal pain, and then the fermentation that goes on with those fermentable carbohydrates causes that excess gas and bloating and additional stomach pain and possibly the diarrhea and constipation. So there's a lot to it, and that's why dietitians exist, to help you figure out what to do in the world of nutrition without getting sucked into diet culture.
Yes, I am really glad you actually brought up the different types of fibers. Would you be able to quickly provide some examples of just insoluble versus soluble, in case people don't know or didn't know there were different types of fibers and what they could look for?
Soluble fiber includes sources like oats, peas, beans, apples, carrots, psyllium husk fiber, citrus fruits, and then sources of insoluble fiber. You can think of like whole wheat flour, whole grains, wheat bran, nuts, beans, cauliflower, potatoes. And so they both serve as great sources of fiber with different properties in the GI system. And depending on what type of symptoms you experience, some fibers will be better tolerated than others.
That's so helpful. Thank you for sharing that. And I like how you mentioned like how both are still important. And especially for those who aren't struggling with anything GI related, I always say just like generally try to eat a wide variety of foods. If fiber is an issue for you, incorporate, more high fiber foods in general, and you likely will get a decent combination of both soluble and insoluble, and soluble and insoluble.
Absolutely, for sure.
Well, speaking of wellness culture again, we really, really want to talk to you about food sensitivity tests, because those are such a huge thing as well with wellness culture. People, I know Emily has some experience. Maybe you should share on this, Emily, before I go into a whole spiel.
I'd love to hear.
They're very popular, and I definitely want to get more into it. But Emily, do you want to kind of share your experience with them first?
Yeah, I'm very excited to talk about this because I have a lot of past background with food sensitivity tests, and we've been waiting to talk to someone about this because my personal experience with my limited time with it, but I can't even imagine how much you have to work with it or talk about it. It was just such a big part of wellness culture. It's still really popular, and we just need to talk about like the validity of it and what goes on with it. So what are your thoughts on food sensitivity tests? What are your thoughts on kind of the elimination diet versus versus an at-home test? But we can start off with, because there was multiple questions in that. We'll just start off with the food sensitivity tests. First and foremost, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, my thoughts are that just like you, I've seen a lot of people come into my practice saying, okay, this is the list of foods I can no longer eat because I've taken a IgG antibody food sensitivity test. And then I talk to them about it, and try to explain to them the validity of these tests. IgG food sensitivity panels are not reliable ways to determine whether or not you are truly sensitive to a specific food, right? The IgG antibody response is actually indicative of foods you commonly consume, not foods that you are sensitive to. So, for example, me, Samina, taking a food sensitivity test, I regularly eat eggs, wheat, dairy, corn, all of the foods. I literally eat everything. And if regularly I'm having eggs, dairy, and wheat, most likely I will be sensitive on that test to eggs, dairy, and wheat, simply because of the way the test is designed to show which foods you commonly consume. And so it is a great way for companies to profit off of people's insecurities, for people to then create this fancy diet where you're only allowed to eat 3 foods that you're not sensitive to, and sell you meal plans based off of this and really profit off of you. There's no validity to them. The best way to determine a food sensitivity is by partnering with a dietitian who can help you navigate your symptoms with a food and symptom journal, right? And help you develop a strategic elimination diet where, okay, you say that you're sensitive to dairy, right? Let's just take that easy one. You eliminate it from your diet for maybe 1 week, and then the next week we reintroduce high lactose containing dairy foods, right? Ice cream, milk, cottage cheese for 3 days, and then see how your symptoms are for the rest of that week. So 3 days on and 3 days off of that food. If you have severe symptoms like excessive diarrhea, just extreme gas, stomach pain, bloating, okay, you probably have a sensitivity. Can we work on including dairy still in your diet and not completely eliminating it, but adding lower lactose foods like the harder cheeses, some lactose-free milk, lactose-free yogurt, etc., right? And do you still have symptoms with those? If not, awesome. We've determined that you have possibly a lactose intolerance, and without doing the breath test, but on a food and symptom journal way of discovering this, and we are still going to introduce lower lactose dairy to your diet. So yeah, the elimination style diet and that reintroduction may not be recommended for all people, since it can be overly restrictive in some ways and not be a good fit for those who struggle with disordered eating and eating disorders. But yeah, you definitely want to talk with a registered dietitian who focuses on helping people expand their diet while identifying their digestive distress.
That's just such a more hopefully freeing approach for the patient or client too, because it doesn't involve cutting out all these things willy-nilly. Like the food sensitivity test will kind of tell you, like, again, based on whatever you ate, which if you eat a wide variety of foods, it's going to really suck when you see the results say that you have to cut out 15, 20 different things. So hopefully this is really getting through to those who maybe are stuck in that spot, that feel just like frustrated. They're like, I've had to like cut all these foods out. Hopefully now they know that maybe they don't actually have to do that. It can be a harder process maybe to go through and like test and eliminate and rinse and repeat kind of thing. But hopefully the end goal, the end accomplishment is a lot more food freedom.
Absolutely. I think one thing that really frustrates me is that it's so sexy and like cool to say like, oh, I'm gluten-free, I'm dairy-free, I'm this, I'm that.
Yes.
But like for people who are just like, oh yeah, I'll take the pizza. Like that's fine. Just
Yeah.
like, what? You just eat? Like that's not cool.
Exactly.
To people in diet culture, right? So like including all foods is cool and it is good
That's
for you,
sexy.
and it is sexy. Yeah. So let's get more of that.
Emily, we can either cut this or add it based on what you want to, what you feel like. But did your place, did they like sell like meal plans and stuff based off of the elimination or the sensitivity test results?
So I wouldn't say they sold them. They were definitely part of it, was a huge part of it though, where like they
Yeah.
would push food sensitivity tests and it would come up with this huge list, like this ridiculously long list of these are all the foods now you have to avoid. And what they would have us do was create meal plans for them. There were like programs they got where they, is this sharing company secrets? This is not. This is very generic. I think I'll be okay.
Yeah, it's very
But they would like got a specific program for this just because it's so you're like, what are they supposed to eat? And you would put in all the foods on their food sensitivity results. And then it would spew out this meal plan that was like this is what you can eat. I literally had a client that had multiple tests done somehow over like there was like something food sensitivity related, but then there was something, I think it was like candida related, which is like a whole nother gut thing, and then something else. And the list was so long that I literally had to make my own Word document of all the foods they could eat and then a list of anything left I could literally think of because it was so long. And I was like, this is obscure. I think one of the personal worst experiences that I know is happening out there is I worked with a child who had this done, and their list came back with all these foods that they eat normally. And like I was working with the parents and they're like, the parents were visibly upset because they're like, these are what the kids eat. And in the back of my head, I'm like, yes,
obviously.
I'm like, please eat these things. Like this test is not, I was like trying to say it in that like weird professional way where it's like, you can't just outright say like, oh yeah,
my employer is bogus.
This is not ethical. But like, it's okay if you eat these foods. And they were like, I hope they're okay. But like, it was just, I could not imagine a child having to like deal with 10, 15 plus food sensitivities in quotes and the stress of that when they're growing and trying to learn what foods they like and just learn about food in general. And they're being told they can't eat these things for whatever reason. I don't even know what it was.
Yes. One of my friends is an allergist, like a physician, and she works at Texas Children's Hospital, and she runs into children being handed these food sensitivity tests daily. And she's like banging her head against the wall because she's like, why are they taking these invalidated tests that just spit out bogus information? And like, yeah, even she said for people who get the like skin scratch tests and different like validated allergy testing from an allergist physician, they need to be interpreted with like their clinical judgment. It isn't black and white. It isn't very accurate. So if you say that you experience, they're looking at your clinical symptoms and what the test says and trying to figure out, you know, what's going on and where you could trial this elimination diet and reintroduction to see how you truly feel. So yeah, it's hard.
So hard. And best case scenario, refer to a dietitian who has experience and knowledge about helping you navigate like your actual food intolerances or allergies.
Absolutely. And for those of you with IBS who experience food sensitivities, number one, first and foremost, I believe you, right? Like we're not here to tell you and like, what's it called? Gaslight people and be like, no, your symptoms are not real. We just want you to possibly take a, like open your mind to the possibility that you aren't as reactive as maybe you have experienced in the past. A lot of IBS symptoms can be triggered by stress response. And so that's where overcoming food fears can really help you in expanding your diet and understanding what you're truly like sensitive to.
I'm so glad you brought that up. That's so important. Like, even though we are saying that these certain tests, they're not valid, not to be really trusted, if you feel like all those foods listed off, you actually don't tolerate, we totally hear you. We want to help you better understand. But again, the goal is food freedom, where you hopefully
Mhm.
can realize that a lot of those foods that maybe you do feel now are causing symptoms, maybe actually aren't causing as many as you think they are. Well, I think that's a good segue into our final piece of the day, which is we've talked about things maybe that don't work, things that aren't recommended, reasons why diet culture, wellness culture, just the worst ever, which our listeners that are not new around here, like, yeah, we get it. But we always have to put a new spin on it. But what are some like non-diety, non-rooted in diet culture ways that our listeners can manage their IBS if they are struggling with that?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, making sure that you are working with either a therapist or a dietitian who can help you on your journey to healing your relationship with food, first and foremost, is going to be very helpful. Practicing then gentle nutrition alongside a dietitian to really help you meet your nutritional needs, your fiber needs to support your digestive symptoms and find relief. And then there are a variety of non-diet approaches to help you manage IBS, right? A GI psychologist can be very helpful in you can do CBT, ACT. There's also something called gut-directed hypnotherapy, which has been studied and researched to be as effective as the low FODMAP diet in managing IBS. So for people with this like visceral hypersensitivity in IBS, everything kind of causes their symptoms. This can really help set the stage of transitioning from always being in that fight or flight phase of your nervous system to the rest and digest phase. And that way, as you incorporate some of these practices with gut directed hypnotherapy, calm your nervous system, you're entering mealtime then with a lowered state of stress, which will then help you reduce your symptoms. Diaphragmatic breathing has been shown to also reduce mealtime stress, which is awesome. It can be done anywhere. It is simply a deep breathing practice that you can look up. I think there are a bunch of videos on YouTube that you can check out. Um, Making sure that you're also looking at your relationship with exercise. We know that high intensity type of exercises can contribute to accelerated GI movements, right? So if you are running a marathon and you're like, oh my gosh, I have to diarrhea, which often happens, the runner's diarrhea, it's a thing. So looking into how exercise impacts your GI system, focusing on more gentle forms of movement that you enjoy, swimming, walking, yoga, pure barre, whatever. Staying adequately hydrated, and even meeting with a pelvic floor physical therapist. If you are someone who has pain with sex, has struggled with constipation all their life, has had babies, and you just feel like since then things have not been normal, a pelvic floor physical therapist can do wonders in helping you relax those muscles to have a nice, smooth bowel movement. Yeah, and there's a bunch more things. One thing that I didn't talk about was the FODMAP diet in detail. And the FODMAP diet is a elimination style diet where you eliminate these highly fermentable carbohydrates from your diet and then strategically reintroduce them to identify your food triggers and ultimately liberalize your diet as much as you tolerate. However, it's not appropriate for everyone. So if you do struggle with the eating disorder, history of it, or disordered eating, or any other co-occurring mental health condition, it may not be appropriate for you, and that's okay. There's still a variety of things for you to focus on. You can even work with a dietitian who specializes in the FODMAP gentle approach, which is really less restrictive. It's taking an assessment of your diet and seeing if you even eat any high FODMAP foods and offering some swaps that are lower in FODMAP. Just like, for example, if you are constantly drinking gallons of milk, and I recommend a lactose-free milk or a plant alternative, that might provide you with some symptom relief and you not have to do the full-fledged FODMAP elimination style diet. So yeah. Lots of
Perfect.
options.
Yes, there's so many good nuggets of information there that you can start off with, and it can, hopefully the options are not overwhelming, but hopefully there was one that maybe drew your interest or you just wanted to learn a little bit more about. You can definitely look into it more. And I'm sure also you have resources on your page as well, which we will plug that later. So they'll definitely have to check that out, but they can find out more there. So I think that's all things I could think of with, with this topic. I feel like we did, or Samina, you did most of the work. We were present for the great time. Like we covered IBS, what exactly it was, how diet culture contributes, gave some great ideas on how to kind of manage it in a non-diety way. Do you have any last thoughts you would like to leave our audience with, though? Things we missed or anything that you'd like them to take away from this the most?
Sometimes with IBS, it's not what you're eating specifically, but possibly how you're eating. So before you jump into changing everything, every single food that you are eating, look at the speed at which you eat. Are you always eating in between like meetings, rushing? Do you skip meals? Are you at a point where you can even access food regularly throughout the day? That is something that you need to prioritize first and foremost before even dissecting your diet to figure out what to eliminate. So yeah, and that can come with, focusing on that gentle nutrition approach.
It's so true. I feel like partly because of diet culture, if not fully because of diet culture, we often do tend to jump to like, what do we have to cut out? What foods do we need to eliminate? When there are so many other parts of the eating experience besides just the actual like food type that can impact so many things, even beyond IBS. And again, that's where we come in, dietitians, not to toot our own horns, but I love that idea to like challenge our listeners who are struggling with this to like think about those other pieces too. And you mentioned like stress and anxiety, how that can also present itself in like cause diarrhea and or constipation sometimes too. Like there is so much more to it than just our food choices. So I love that advice of digging a little bit deeper than that. Well, before we get into our bonus question of the day, let our listeners know where they can find you if they want to learn more. I am sure that our IBS listeners are like, heck yeah, I want to like keep hearing from her. So let them know where they can find you, anything you're offering, any services. Is your time to let them know what you got going on.
Yeah, if you are on social media, I'm on Instagram and TikTok at inclusive.ibs.dietitian. I post on there pretty frequently. And I am accepting clients in my 12-week IBS Food Freedom Package, where I help you find relief without getting sucked into diet culture. You can head to my website, www.wholesomestart.com, to apply for your free discovery call and see if it's a good fit for you. And if you just want to dip your toes into how to find relief from IBS without a side of diet culture, I do have a free guide. It's 5 ways to avoid IBS flares that you can also access from my website.
And we will be sure to link all of that in the show notes. So if you didn't get it now, you can just go check the description and go there.
Awesome.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. We know you aren't leaving quite yet because you're staying for the bonus question, and they're going to have to go listen to the Beet Deets to hear that. But to kind of wrap up the bulk of today's episode, we really appreciated having you on. This is such a great topic for us to go over. We haven't, like Hannah said at the beginning, we never have really talked about this. And we've been searching for like a gut health person to come on for so long, just because it's so prevalent online. And we will be referring to this episode a lot in the future because it'll be very valuable. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Of course. I feel like now that we're ending this, I have so many things that I want to talk to you guys about.
We'll have to do a part 2. We'll do a part 2.
We didn't touch about.
Yeah, you can always come back. I'm sure there's always going to be more stuff, or something else wellness culture we'll think about and come up and you can chat about it. But we can definitely have a part 2.
We could,
Cool.
I mean, we could literally do a whole just gut health breakdown, like beyond IBS. I'm sure there is so much, Samina, that you can educate on because it's so popular right now and there's so much diet culture BS going on there.
Yeah, especially with like probiotics, you guys.
You mentioned supplements earlier and I was going to ask about it, but I was like, do we even open that can of worms? We definitely need to get into that because we don't have an episode on that yet either. So that would be a great part
Well,
two.
this is a promise part 2 then. You will be coming back on.
Yeah.
So stay tuned, everyone. You will be getting part 2 to all things gut health with Samina.
Ooh,
soon.
exciting.
Yes.
Well, for now, you guys can find part 1.5 in the bonus question. We're going to be getting into the best type of frozen dairy dessert. So that'll be a great time. We'll see you guys over there.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.
Bye, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in on this episode of the Up-Beet Dietitians with your hosts, Emily Krause and Hannah Thompson.
We appreciate you all so much for continuing to support us. In order to support us and sustain the success of this podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review.
If you'd like to provide us feedback for future episodes and guest stars, follow us on Instagram at the Up-Beet Dietitians.
Lastly, you can show us support by providing a monthly donation using the link at the end of our bio.
Once again, thank you so much for listening today and stay tuned next Wednesday for a new episode. Until then, we hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.